Hello everyone, welcome to the session on unsupervised learning. I am Jiten Rana and along with me Anlut Paldas and Anish, and we are part of RBS Tech Sciences team and we work as applied scientists in this team. So we have divided this session into two parts. I'll be covering the first part and then Nirupal will cover the second part. Okay, and in the end we can take up any questions if you have. Hello. So let's get started. So as a part of the uh, part one, I'm going to cover these three things: basics of one supervised learning paradigm, clustering, and GANs. Let's go ahead. Mm, to start with, if you think about it, in the machine learning space, there are three kind of broad categories of problem. One is supervised learning, other is unsupervised learning, and the third is reinforcement learning. Okay? We won't go into reinforcement learning for now. Uh, to start with, what is supervised learning? So in supervised learning, you are given an input data X and the corresponding label Y, and the goal of the machine learning algorithm is to find an appropriate function f which maps X to Y, right? In contrast, in unsupervised learning, we are given only the input data X and not the Y, right? And now, then what is the goal? The goal is to find interesting pattern from the data. However, this term interesting pattern is very subjective and varies from problem to problem. Since it is subjective, it is very difficult. This is one of the reason that unsupervised learning problems are very difficult, because it is not clear from the beginning what kind of patterns to look for, and even if we know what kind of patterns to look for, it is very difficult to steer models towards identifying those patterns. Why unsupervised learning is important, right? One of the core reasons is that in general we have large data available which is unlabeled, and if we do it properly, this data can be very good source of very meaningful insights that can be leveraged by business teams or any other teams, right? So that is why unsupervised learning is a very core important area of research. uh, Further, there are some problems which are inherently unsupervised in nature. For example, consider the problem of improving the resolution of an image. So in this problem, you are given a low resolution image, and you want to obtain a high resolution image for that, right? Now, if you think about it, there is no one single answer for this problem, right? I mean, there is no one single high resolution image which is appropriate for the input image, right? So this, I mean, inherently it is unsupervised in nature, in the sense that you don't have label for the data, right? And the job of the model here is to take low resolution image as an input and generate a appropriate high resolution image, while during training it has not seen any high resolution image. That's the thing, right? uh, Further, I mean, there are some problems which are efficient or efficiently tackled when they are modeled as an unsupervised learning problem as opposed to supervised learning problem. So consider an example of anomaly detection, where the job is to identify whether a particular data point is anomalous or not, right? Now if you want to build a supervised learning model, that typically you will require data points which has the input is X and output is basically whether it is a normal data point or anomalous data point, right? Now this problem is difficult when it is modeled as supervised learning problem, primarily because of two reasons. One, that anomalous data points occur in very rarely, right? And second, there is no standard, the anomalous behavior or the normal behavior keeps on changing over the time, and that is where supervised learning approaches become very difficult for this problem. However, when you model this unsupervised learning problem, Typical approach is, what they do is that they model the density of the normal data points, okay, or of the normal behavior. An anomalous data point can be detected uh, as the you know as a data point which falls in the low density region. And see now, for this, in unsupervised learning approach, you only need the data point which have normal behavior, and using them you can model the density of the normal behavior, which can then be used for identifying the anomalous data point. So you don't really need a label data, right? And problem becomes much simpler and much elegant. Yeah. So there are typically four types of unsupervised learning problems that we are going to cover in this talk. So namely, they are dimensionality reduction, clustering, generative modeling, and representation learning. As a part of this talk, I'll cover the first three, and representation learning will be covered by Nirupal. So, what is dimensionality reduction? Right? So, dimensionality reduction is a task where your input data, it typically lies in the high dimensional vector space, and we want to transform it to low dimensional vector space without losing important information. Why do we want to do this? Alright. In general, it is difficult to visualize or analyze the high dimensional data, right? And that is one of the reasons that we want to do dimensional reduction. Second is, if you have high dimensional data, then you will require more model parameters, and it will lead to larger models. While if you have low dimensional data, then you will typically require simpler or simpler models, or the models with the low parameters, right? And which is also very important, right? And third, which is sort of application, but sometimes you want to compress the input, right? I mean, if you want, say, if you have an image, you want to compress and then send it, right? So when you have low bandwidth, low bandwidth, right? So that is where dimensional reduction becomes important and plays a role. Next is clustering. Clustering is a task where you want to group the input data points which are similar to each other, right? And you want to separate the data points which are very different from each other, and put them into different groups. So that is the task of clustering. Just to give you an example, in the e-commerce context, you might want to analyze the group of customers, or all your customers, based on their transactional behavior, right? So in this case, what you can do is that you can take the data, customers transactional behavior, transaction history from last 6 months, build some features, and then do the clustering using those features. And to your surprise, you might find out clusters where loyal customers are placed in one cluster, and the customers which only shop during discount, which are called as discount shoppers, get grouped into different separate cluster, right? So clustering data points based on your their based on features can reveal many good insights about your customers, right? So that is why we do clustering. Secondly, the third point is generative modeling. Here the task is to mainly the model the distribution of the underlying data. And why do we want to do that? See, once we have the distribution of the input data, right, we can use it for many downstream tasks. This distribution can be used for classification, or as explained earlier, we can use this distribution for anomaly detection. You can even use this distribution for augmenting your data, right? You can generate the data using your using the obtained distribution, right? And that is where generative model becomes very important. I mean, if you want to do data augmentation, if you want to do anomaly detection, and many more things, right? The fourth is representation learning. The task is mainly about obtaining the compact or low dimensional representation of your data points. This is specifically very important where your input data is not numeric, right? For example, take the NLP data set, right? I mean, or even a problem. Say you have a problem of sentiment detection, where you have an input sentence and the output is, whether it is a positive sentiment or negative sentiment. This is a classification task. Now your input is text, but model understands only numbers, right? So how do you obtain a numerical representation or vector representation of your input, right? That is where representation learning comes into picture, uh, which tries to obtain the representation of your input, which is best suitable for your task, for a downstream task, right? uh, yeah. Let's start with dimensional reduction. So as explained, right, dimensional reduction is a task of projecting high dimensional data into the lower dimensional data, lower dimensional space. Why it is important? As explained, it is tough to visualize or analyze the high dimensional data, right? So whereas lower dimensional data is more favorable for visualization. Also, if you have lower dimensional data, you will end up building smaller models at least, right? And these are further, it is also useful in compression, right? So that is where dimensional reduction is important. Some of the popular techniques for dimensional reductions are PCA, T-SNE, matrix factorization, etc. Yeah. Let's look at PCA in this course. So in PCA, the idea is to project the input data onto the axis or plane which captures the maximum variance in the input. I'll show in the next slide what I mean by that. And theoretically, it turns out that the axis or the plane axis that on which you project turn out to be the eigenvector of the covariance matrix of the data. And if it is, say, three-dimensional plane, then the plane will be the plane which is spanned by the top three eigenvectors of the covariance matrix of the data, right? Let's see by visualization. So in this, the left image shows the distribution of our data. Our data is two-dimensional data, and it shows the scatter plot of our data. See, these are all the data points in 2D plane. If you see, most of the data points are varying along this line, right? And so when if you project all the data points on this red line, then it will capture the maximum variance. Or simply speaking, when you project the data points on the red line and compute the variance of the projections, it will be the highest. By that we mean that, okay, this captures the highest variance in the data, and hence we call this red line as the first principal component, because it is the axis which is capturing the maximum variance in the data, right? And the first image, the image in the center, is exactly about that. The red data points are the points which are projected on the red line, and if you see, the variance is highest, as opposed to and also theoretically, this red line is the first eigenvector, or the eigenvector with the highest value of the covariance matrix, right? And since we are two-dimensional data, we will have at max two components, right? And the second component turns out to be the second eigenvector, and if you project the data along that component, the variation will be the lowest, right, or the second highest. Now so the third image is basically the projection of this red points are the projections of the actual data points on the second principal component, or the second eigenvector of the covariance matrix. Now how do you use this for data compression? Just to talk about an application, right? So say say these are the data points that you have, and say you want to send them to you are at a transmitter end, and you want to send them to some receiver, right? Now you are low bandwidth, so you want to compress these data points and send it to the receiver, right? Since you are low bandwidth, you want to compress this data in such a manner, and also you want to ensure that when you compress, you lose the least information. So one of the ways in which we can use PCA is that first you know project the data into the lower dimensional data. In our case, project the data onto the first principal component or the primary eigenvector of the covariance matrix. By doing so, you will ensure that you will capture the most variance in the data, and you will lose the least information, right? And once you project right on the first eigenvector, you send this values, the whatever is the projection value, right, along the first eigenvector, as you transmit those values, right? And now you will, since it is the projection on the first eigenvector, it will be just one single scalar, right? So earlier you were sending to send that data point, you will have to send both x1 and x2. Now you have to just send only the projection along the first eigenvector, which is scalar. So you have drastically reduced almost the number of data points that you are sending, or the amount of information that you are sending is reduced by half. Now at the receiver end, it will receive the projection along the first eigenvector. Of course, you also send the first eigenvector to the receiver, which is just one time job, and using this receiver, the projected value and the first eigenvector, the receiver will be able to capture the data point in the 2D dimension, right? It is just multiplication of the projected value into the first eigenvector. So this way we are able to reduce the amount of information that we are sending by half, right? And we are able to achieve the data compression with the minimum loss. Let's go on to clustering. So I explained, right, clustering is a task of grouping objects which are similar to each other, and putting objects into different group when they are not similar to each other, right? So that is what clustering is about. When it comes to techniques, there are many different type of techniques for clustering. So this one of the oldest or simplest is a centroid based clustering, where each cluster is represented by a mean of the data points that belong to that cluster, right? And that is the cluster identity, that mean vector. As opposed to that connectivity based clustering is the method which tries to put objects into single group when they are connected by each other, right? So say if A is connected to B and B is connected to C, then ABC, the method will try to put ABC into one group, right? And that is the connectivity based method. So in this methods, right, the idea is that each point belongs to one cluster, right? And this is called hard assignment. So one of the popular example of centroid based clustering is the k-means clustering, which is very popular, right? And it does the hard assignment. As opposed to that, there are probability based clustering methods, which actually in which a point can belong to multiple clusters. So a single data point can belong to cluster A with 0.5 probability, it can belong to cluster B with 0.3 probability, and so on, right? In these methods, the main idea is to do first the density estimation for each cluster, right? And then for each data point, the probability of it belonging to each cluster is calculated, is obtained, right? Gaussian mixture model is one of the popular example of distribution based method, right? For the purpose of this talk, we'll go into k-means in detail, and rest other, I think the literature is easily available everywhere, right? So in k-means, the input to the algorithm is k, which is the number of clusters that we want from the data point. So that is one input, and which a user has to provide. And suppose that you are given n data points, the objective is to get k clusters such that clusters data points belong to the same cluster are nearest to each other, given some distance metric, and data points that belong to different clusters are far apart according to the distance method that we have chosen, right? mm, let's go into it, but let me describe the k-means algorithm, right? So it has it has basically, five steps. Basically, as explained, right, the step one is to choose the number of cluster, which is k, and it is given by, say, the user, right? And since you have k clusters, now the idea is that, okay, in k means the cluster is represented by the cluster centers, right? So initially we don't have any clusters, sorry, we don't have any cluster center, so we initialize them randomly. So say if your data is 10 dimensional and k is 5, then in that case you randomly obtain the 10 dimensional vectors, the 10 dimensional vectors, you randomly initialize them, right? And that will be your 5 cluster centers. You take the cluster center. The third step is about, assigning the data point to each cluster. So the data point assignment happens this way, that for each data point you compute its distance with all the k cluster centers, and whichever cluster center is the closest in terms of distance, you assign that cluster number as the cluster label as the label for that particular data point, right? And this you do for all the in data points in your data set, right? Now once you have the so at the end of step 3 you will have the cluster label for each data point. So now once you have the data points for a cluster, you can update the cluster center, since initially it was randomly initialized, right? So now you can actually come up with a better cluster center. One of the way to do it is by taking the mean of the all the data points that belong to that cluster, and that can be your new cluster center, right? You repeat for all the click clusters, and that is the step 4 where you are updating the cluster center. Since this is an iterative process, you can repeat step 3 and 4 until you see some convergence. Now the convergence is basically that if after step 4 you're seeing that, okay, your cluster centers are not changing much, or after step 3 if you're seeing that, okay, your cluster assignment, say 95% of the data points are remaining in the same cluster as the previous step, then you stop the algorithm, right? And that is the basically, actually it should have been step 5, yeah, so that's when you stop the algorithm, right? So there's an iterative process where you keep on repeating steps in 4 until the convergence. Let's look at it by a visual example. So say you are given a data set, all the data points are in the green initially, and you want to say cluster them into 2 groups, right? So in our case key is 2, right? And the data point dimension is also 2, right? So how do we do it? So initially the step 1 is done, right? That we have chosen the key as 2. Now the next step is to choose the cluster centers or initialize the cluster centers. So in this case, we randomly pick up 2 data points from this 2D plane and set them as cluster center. So here, say blue and red are the cluster centers which are randomly initialized. Now let's move on to step 3, which is the cluster assignment step. So for this step, we are going to pick up all the data points one by one, compute their distance with both blue and red center, and whichever is the closest will assign that label. So say for particular this data point, the blue data point is closer, right? So we are going to assign that, okay, this data point belongs to blue cluster, whereas this data point belongs to the red cluster because its distance with red center is lower as compared to the blue cluster. So let's see the next step, right? So after once we do it for all the data points in our data set, we have cluster label for each of the data point, right? Now see, this is the step 3 done for the first time, right? The cluster assignment. Here if you see the initially randomly chosen cluster center is not a very good representative of your cluster. So see, this blue cluster, the center is here, and all your points that belong to that blue cluster, right, are here. So we can actually update the cluster representative, right? Or we can So one way to do it is by taking the mean of all the data points that belong to that cluster. So here what we can do is that we can take mean of all the blue data points, and that we can treat as a new cluster center for the blue cluster. Similarly we can do for red, and this is the cluster update step performed for the first time. And now you see this blue cluster center is much better representative of the blue cluster as compared to the earlier blue center, right? Similarly for red cluster. Now other thing, see, now if you notice, some of the data points on the red cluster are closer to the blue versus and some of the data points in blue cluster are closer to the red center, right? So what we can do is that we can go back to step 3 and do the cluster assignment again. So now what we'll do is that we'll take up all the data points, compute their cluster, compute the distance with both blue and red center again, and update the membership, right? So after that cluster assignment step for the second time, this is how it looks like. That okay, now these points now belong to the blue cluster because they are closer to the blue center. See, earlier they were belonging to red cluster, now they belong to the blue cluster because they are more closer with the updated blue center, right? Now, so this is the cluster assignment result of the cluster assignment step for the second time. See, now again, if you see the center, the current center or current representative of the blue cluster is not a very good representative, right? So we can again update the cluster center by updating the cluster by resorting to step 4 for the second time. So let's take the mean of all blue data point and all red data point and update the centers, right? So this is the cluster update step for the time. And if you see now the this is the one, right? So one second, this is the one that now blue points, this is the updated center of the blue cluster, this is the updated center of the red cluster, and both points are much better representative of respective clusters, right? Now again, now we can keep on performing step 3 and step 4, right, until we see that the points, the cluster assignment, the points that were belonging, the points are not changing that cluster, right? So say if we are saying that after cluster assignment step, say 99% of the points retain their cluster membership as compared to the earlier step, then we stop the cluster algorithm, right? And yeah, so this is the final step, and after this we won't perform any step and we can halt the algorithm. So this is how k-means work. So let's consider some applications of clustering. There are many. I mean, clustering can be useful in exploratory data analysis, it can be useful for dimensional reduction, it can be useful for feature extraction, and many more. For the purpose of this talk, we'll showcase an application of clustering for image compression. Okay, so how do you go about using k-means for image compression? So let's look at that. Suppose you are given an image of which is 512 by 512 pixels, and each pixel is represented by say 3-dimensional vector which is RGB value. So for example, if you have 512 by 512 image and there are x and y pixel, so x is represented by 3-dimensional vector which denotes RGB value, and similarly y, right? Now to do k-means, right, what you do is that you treat each pixel as a data point and then perform clustering using this data point. So if you have 512 by 512 image, then you will have roughly 25,000 data points, right, in your data set, and each data point is 3-dimensional vector which contains RGB values. Now once you do the clustering, right, at the end of clustering output, you will have cluster center and you will have the cluster membership of each data point. So for each pixel you will have the label that okay, it belongs to cluster number 5 or y belongs to cluster number 6 and so on. and for each cluster you will have the cluster center, which is just the average of the or mean of the data points that belongs to that cluster. Now once you have this, how do you reconstruct the image, right? So say you know that x belongs to cluster number 5. So to reconstruct the image, what you can do is that you can replace you can put the cluster center of cluster number 5 in place of x, right? You can repeat this for all the pixels, all the 25,000 pixels in your data set, and this is the way you reconstruct the image, right? So now just compare this with the original image. Now original image had 512 by 512 by 3, which had roughly 75,000 numbers, or right. Now in our case, when you compress the image, suppose you had only you had chosen 250 as the number of clusters, right? So in this case you will have to maintain only 250 cluster centers, which is, so each center is of 3 dimensions, so roughly 750 numbers, plus for each pixel you need to maintain the cluster membership. So say there are 512 by 512, so roughly 25,000 numbers, which is basically which denotes the cluster assignment for each pixel. So 75,000 plus 750, so 25,000 plus 750, right? So roughly 26,000 numbers you have to maintain. So which is roughly the 1/3 of numbers that you had to originally save. So this is the compression ratio is roughly, compression percentage is roughly 66%, right? When you do compression using k-means. Let's look at some results. So since this is the original image, now let's start with k equal to 256, right? And when you do k equal to 256, the image that you get is almost indistinguishable from the original image. And so this is remarkable, right? That you are achieving roughly 67% of the compression with almost no loss of data. Now look at k equal to 2, just to see, just to get more feel of how it is working, right? So since there are k equal to, there are only 2 clusters, so there are only 2 cluster centers, and hence there are only 2 colors in the image, right? So this is just a 2 color image. Now if you have 4 clusters, then you will have 4 colors in your 4 cluster centers and 4 colors in your image, right? And so on. If you can see that with just minor increase in k, you are able to achieve with just k equal to 32, you are able to get a really good compressed image of the original image, right? And with k equal to 256, it is just indistinguishable. So this is how you can use k-means for image compression. So far we have covered dimensionality reduction and clustering. Now let's move on to generative modeling. So what is generative modeling? The generative models are a model which actually learns the distribution of the input data. So they learn the distribution from which input data has been generated. Right? Now why do we want to do that? See, once you have the distribution from which input data has been generated, you can use it for many purposes, right? You can actually create new samples using that distribution, right? And that can be helpful for your data augmentation when you have less data set, less number of data points. We can use it for classification as well. Naive is one example. We can do it for regression. We can use it for anomaly detection, where if a new point falls in the less density regime according to the input data distribution, we can think of it as an anomaly, right? Another use case is to fill the missing data, where see if some of the parameter values are missing in the data point, you can actually use them, fill them using the input distribution that you have, right? So there are many applications of generative models. Typically popular approaches are doing density estimation using the input data. Naive is also one of the examples, very popular for classification. So typical methods are density estimation models, where the idea is to put some assumption on the input data distribution. For example, I mean, if you have all the numeric all the parameters which are numeric, then you might want to uh, assume that your input data is actually distributed as multivariate Gaussian model. Now so once you have that assumption, all you have to do is estimate the parameters of that multivariate Gaussian models, which you can do which you can estimate using maximum likelihood estimation on the input data, right? And so while these models are simple and efficient, one of the drawbacks is that you have to assume the input data distribution on the input data, right? And that is where the problem is, that if the assumption goes wrong, then the model will not be able to perform well in the downstream task. So that is where we want to that is where GANs come into the picture. So let's move to GAN. So GAN, as the title suggests, it's short form for generative adversarial networks. Now they also try to model the distribution of input data, but they don't do it explicitly, like how I mentioned that like how density estimation models do, right? That where they first assume the distribution, say multivariate Gaussian, and then estimate the parameters. GANs don't do it that way. They implicitly try to model the input data distribution. So basically in the GAN we have a generator network in which the input is some random noise and output is a sample, which can be thought of as a sample generated from the actual input data distribution. Okay, now how do we learn this network generator network? So for this, we actually during training we make use of two components, generator and discriminator, and we'll see how they play along with each other, right? And may actually for the training, the framework that is adopted is a true two-player adversarial game network, okay, which is used to learn the parameters of generator and discriminator. Okay? We'll see how all this comes together into learning generator function. But before that, let's go into what a two-player adversarial game looks like. Okay? So as the name suggests, right, this game has two players, and since it's an adversarial game, both of the players have competing objectives. So for example, consider the case of identifying money counterfeiting, right? So in this case, we have say two parties, one is criminal, other is cop. Now criminals main objective is to create or make a money note which is as good as real, so that cop cannot distinguish whether it is a fake note or real note, while a cop has an totally opposite objective, where given a note, cop should be able to tell whether it's a real note or fake note, right? So you see that both cop and criminal have totally opposite objective. Criminal is trying to counterfeit the money, and cop is actually trying to distinguish whether it's a real note or a fake note, right? Now let's see how we can make use of this idea to train the GANs, right? So as I explained, right, in the GAN we have two parties, one is generator and discriminator. Generator can be thought of as a criminal, discriminator can be thought of as a cop. So discriminator will given an input, discriminator should be will be trying to tell whether it is a real or fake, right? And generator is the party or model or network which will be trying to generate a sample which almost looks like a real sample. So for example, consider the network which generates the image. In our case, we have say some training set which has some images, right, in our training set, right? Now so say we sample one of the image from the training set and pass it to the discriminator. If a discriminator is very good, right, then discriminator should be able to tell whether that it's a real image, right? And now let's say we have a generator network to which the input is some random noise, and it will say output will be some image from the generator. Now when we pass it to the discriminator, right, if discriminator is good, it will be able to tell that okay, it's a fake image, meaning that okay, it's an image generated by generator, not the real image from the training set, right? So a good discriminator will tell it's a real image if the image is from the training set, and it will tell it's a fake image if the image is from a generator, right? Now that's a that's a case when the discriminator is good, while a good discriminator, sorry, a good generator is the one which generates an image which when passed to discriminator, a discriminator won't be able to tell it's a fake image. I mean, right, because the image generated by a good generator is so like closely looking to real image that discriminator is fooled, right? So the objective of generator is to fool the discriminator, okay? And so now you see, right, that in this case both generator and discriminator have competing objectives. Generator is trying to fool the discriminator, where discriminator is trying to catch whether the image is real or fake, right? And it's objective which is competing to the generator objective, right? That discriminator is not trying to get fooled, right? So the equation below is actually the formal mathematical expression of the loss function of generator, where d is the discriminator function and x is the real input, while gz is the output of generator. I'm not going into much detail of the exact function of this equation. Just we can refer to the paper for exact details. And the discriminator objective is totally opposite, so which is just the negative of this expression on the right, okay? So using these two loss functions, we train generator and discriminator. Just to describe procedure again, by running example, let's look at this. So say this is on the left, we have an image which is actual real image from the training data set, and on the right we have an image which is generated by our generator. So basically to the generator we pass some random noise, and this is a generator function, and generator basically generates some image which is this. So this is the output of the this third block, okay? Now say then we pass image to the discriminator function. Now say if we pass the real image to the discriminator function, the good discriminator should produce output near 1, meaning it should tell that okay, it's a real image. Now when we pass this image generated from the generator to the discriminator, the good discriminator should try to make this output near 0, because it's an image generated from the generator, right? While a generator's objective is to generate an image in such a way that the discriminator output is very close to 1. So a good generator would try to generate gz in such a way that dgz is near to 1, right? And this is an intuitive idea under which the learning is happening for both generator and discriminator. Now this we can keep on going until we have good enough generator. Now when we say that it's a good enough generator, it's if it's a good generator, then it will be able to fool the discriminator very well. So in that case, discriminator in most of the cases, whether it's a real image or fake image, discriminator will produce the output somewhere near 0.05, because it's not able to tell whether it's a real image or fake image. So if that happens consistently, then it means that okay, we have been able to produce a good generator, and that's when we'll stop the training, okay? Now whatever I have mentioned, right, this is that was a intuitive explanation of how the training happens for discriminator and generator. This is a snippet from the paper itself, and you can actually go through it later to understand in detail, but the crux remains same, that the intuitive explanation that I explained is about how the training happens for both discriminator and generator. GANs in detail in terms of what a generator function does and what a discriminator does and how the training happens, let's go through the entire process by a running example. So say we have an input data which is two-dimensional data. We have around 1,000 points. We have two dimensions x and y. On the x is uniformly distributed between -50 to 50, and y is simply just a square of x. So our one data point is a tuple of x comma y, where y is just x square and x is uniformly distributed between -50 to 50, and we have around 1,000 data points in our data set. Now we want to learn a generator function which can produce a data point along this parabolic manifold, right? That is the job that we want generator to perform. So how we do it? So see, now our training set is basically 1,000 data points, which has two dimension, and we'll also try to generate say 1,000 data points using generator function. Input to the generator function will be some random noise, and the output will be some two-dimensional data point, and we'll generate 1,000 data points. And then we'll use a discriminator function. We'll pass either real data point from this input data or the data point which is generated by generator, and ask discriminator to discriminate whether it's a real point or it is a point generated by the generator, right? And say if we do it for do this one entire iteration for 1,000 times, right? Let's see the output that so after that we have run the 1,000 iterations of training. Let's see, we again generate say 1,000 data points from generator, and let's see how they look like, right? So some of the points to note about the green data points which are generated by generator after 1,000 iterations of training. You see that generator the generated data points are far off. The distribution of them is far off from the real data. Basically, if you see x is distributed from -100 to 100, while y's range is from 500 to 1,000, as opposed to real data where x is between -50 to 50 and y is between 0 to 2,500, right? So this is where how and even the relationship between x and y of generated data point is not parabolic, right? So I mean generator distribution, so generator is not able to generate data point from the distribution which input data follows, right? But let's train it for 1,000 more iterations and see what happens. So now after 1,000 iterations we again generate 1,000 data points, and then see now it is looks like output is little better than 1,000 iterations, right? That now x and y of generator of the green points is pretty much in the range of real data, right? And however, the relationship between x and y is not exactly relationship between x and y in the generated data is not very similar to the relationship between x and y of the real data, right? So let's train for more points. Now with every 1,000 iterations you are able to see that the green data points trajectory is like pretty much similar to the real. It's actually getting better, and it is now resembling more with the real data. We can keep on doing for more and more iterations, and if you see after 9,000 iterations the generated data by generator are pretty much in the pretty much very similarly, they look very similar to the real data, right? And so generator has been now good, and if you pass green point to the discriminator, it won't be able to identify whether it is a real data or a fake data, right? So that's a power that generator has been able to now produce the data points from the distribution of the input data, right? So this is this brings me to the end of my talk. Just last few points. There have been many variants of GANs that have been developed now. I mean, one of the popular is conditional GANs. So the stark difference between this conditional GAN and the vanilla GAN is that, in the vanilla GAN we in the generator we just use random noise as an input, right? While in this case we basically condition both discriminator and generator on additional info which is provided by y. Okay, now say suppose you want to generate an image of dog, right? So in that case you might uh, along with the random noise as an input to generator, you might add certain features related to dog um, as an input to the generator network, and similarly you can use the same feature for the discriminator network as well. So this way generator will be able to generate the output conditioned on information provided, which is provided by y, right? So this is the conditional GAN. There are many other variants of GANs like info GANs and so on and so forth, which you can go through in detail later. But whole concept remains same, that you have generator and discriminator network, and they basically try to compare with each other. Right? Now let's look at some applications. Right? See, there are many applications of GANs. Some of them I think you might also be aware of. See, I mean, initially in the talk, right, I explained about improving the resolution of an image. So you might have on the left you have a low resolution image. In the right you have a high resolution image, right? So you can input a low resolution image to the GAN generator network, and it gives you high resolution image. This could be one of the very good use case for GANs, right? Some of the other examples are graph based examples where you have an image and you have some blobs in between. Now you want to reconstruct those part of the image. Now GAN can be used for this. Some of the other examples are, you have one type of view of say the street, and you might want to convert it to say lane type of views, right? Just like how you see in the Google Maps, right? So there are several examples, and you would have noticed in some of the social media platforms, right, that you have an image of a real person, and then you try to generate a caricature for those, right? So these are some of the very popular, important uh, examples of applications of GANs. Mm, right. So this brings to the end of my talk. Thanks a lot everyone for listening to me patiently. If you have any questions, I will be able to take later. In the next part of the talk, Nirpal will provide a presentation on representation learning. So I hope you will enjoy that as well.
Hello and welcome to the second session of Unsupervised Learning. I am Nilotpal and I'll be the instructor for this session. I am an applied scientist at the Retail Business Services team here at Amazon. In this session, we'll mainly look at representation learning. Representation learning deals with learning good representations from unlabeled data. So whenever we have image, for instance, or text or graph or speech, etc., we want to turn them into vectors, or in other words, we want to learn meaningful representations of these images and texts. And after we learn these representations, we can then use them for various applications like clustering or retrieval or like training any other downstream supervised models. Now, many of these useful representation learning methods are in fact unsupervised in nature, or like they are self-supervised, which is also considered as a subtype of unsupervised learning. And so it means uh, that unsupervised representation learning doesn't use any explicit supervision like human level data. Rather, these meanings are learned by exploring the intrinsic distribution or structure of the data set. Like, for example, distribution of words in documents. And talking about its usefulness, most of our data are unlabeled, like most of the images in internet. And also in some cases, like in medical domain, labeled data is very hard to find, but there is a lot of unlabeled raw data. So unsupervised representation learning is a powerful way to leverage this enormous amount of unlabeled data that we have available. And so we'll look at representation learning techniques for different domains, text, graphs, and images. In case of text, we'll look at the word and language representation learnings from raw text data, like word-to-vec and BERT models. In case of graphs, we'll look at some of the techniques to encode the graph structures, such as deep work and node-to-vec, which learns powerful node representations. And for image, we look at powerful techniques which are using self-supervised contrastive learning methods for feature extraction. So first, what we want to mainly look at it in this section is how to represent the meaning of the words. So let's have some understanding of the words representations in general. And this is important because a lot of languages are bound up in words and their meanings. And as humans, we are able to understand what a word means, but computer cannot understand words and they can only understand numbers. So we need to be able to provide good representations of words in terms of numbers. And so what this is all about. And and one of the simplest representation is what is called one-hot representation. And so it is a long vector of all zeros except for and one at the index of that word. So we see as an example the one-hot representation of banana, mango, and the dog. So this is a simple representation, but they are not very useful due to many reasons. First of all, they do not encode any meaning. So, for example, it doesn't say that banana is somewhat closer to mango in some sense, and they are less similar to the representation of dogs. And secondly, obviously, these representations can get very large if we have a very large number of words in our vocabulary. And in some cases, there could be up to 1 million words uh, that could be present in our vocabulary. And so it will require a lot of computation if we use such a large sized vector. And the third challenge is that it is difficult to introduce new words, or it cannot handle new words. Um, yeah, basically it cannot represent new words which are unknown. And so the distributed representation is much more desirable because in distributed representations, we represent the words using dense vectors, and they're typically represented in a very low dimensional space like 128 or 512, and which is orders of magnitude smaller than the number of words in our vocabulary. And it is called distributed because the meaning of the words is itself is distributed within the dimensions of the vectors. And so here, as an example, maybe some of these dimensions will capture the similarity between banana and mango, like their color or the fact that they are fruits. So let us look at this word-to-vec representation. So this is based on something called distributional semantics or distributional hypothesis. It says that the meaning of a word is given by the words which it frequently occurs with, which essentially means that, in other words, that words which are used and appear in similar contexts tend to have similar meanings. So here it ties the meaning of a word with the context with which it appears in. And it intuitively makes sense because if we know which word to use in a given context, then we know the meaning of that word. And so here we can say three sentences and where the word banking is used. And so this distributional hypothesis, what it says is that the meaning of banking is the average average of all the words uh, that are present around this word in all the sentences. So here the notation is that the banking word is our target word. So it is the word which we are finding the meaning for. And the words to the left and to the right side of it are called the context words. So in word2vec, the basic setup is that we have a corpus of corpus C, and also we have a vocabulary V. So this corpus are like the Wikipedia, all the things that are there in Wikipedia. So that could be one corpus, and the vocabulary are all the unique words that are there in the Wikipedia dataset. So it could be large, like 10,000 to 50,000 words could be present in the vocabulary. And so in this algorithm, for each word, we learn a set of two vectors. So one is called the word vector and another is the context vector. And so when the word is used as a target, it is represented with the word vector. And when it is used as a context, it is represented by the context vector. So basically we learned two matrices, one for word vector and one for context vectors, and both of them are of equal size, which is n by d. N is the number of words in our vocabulary and d is the dimension of the word representations. So given that there are two architectures to learn these embeddings, one is called continuous bag of words and the other one is skipgram. And the continuous bag of words, it predicts the way it learns the embeddings is it predicts the target given the context words. So as shown on this figure, uh, it takes uh, it takes the context vectors of all these context words and take their average. And this is the then becomes the representation of the context or the embeddings of the context. And given this embedding, it then estimates the probability of the correct target word using the context representations. Whereas in skipgram, the case is opposite. So in this case, it predicts the context words given our target word. So we use the word vector representation for the target word, and from this representation, we again learn use softmax to predict the probability of each one of the context words. And so let's take a look at the skipgram model more closely, and the continuous bag of words is the opposite case. So here in this example, the banking is our target word, and so we define a context window around it. So in this case, it is of length 2. And then according to skipgram, we want to predict the probability, or we want to predict the context words given these target words. And so, for example, for banking, we want to say that turning into crisis and S are their context words. And so what we do is we maximize in our learning process, we maximize the probability of the context given the training words as depicted here. So basically we maximize these probabilities, probability W t minus 2 given the target word. So let's look at our loss functions next. So here T is the number of words in our corpus. And so what we do is we take each word in our corpus as target and define a context window of length m around it. And then we maximize the product of probabilities of all the context words given the target word. So Wi is the target word and Wi plus j are the context words. So j varies between minus m to m. And this is optimized with respect to theta. And so this theta are basically the two-word matrices that we talked about. And then as usual, we take the log of it, which converts this into a summation, which we can then optimize using any stochastic gradient descent approach like Adam. And the way we compute this probability is by using softmax. And so these are these probabilities here. And so the probability of the context word the probability of the context word Wi plus j given the target word Wi is given by the softmax definition here. And so in the numerator, we take the dot product of the word representation of the target word and the context vector representation of the context word. And in the denominator, we sum it up across all the words in our vocabulary to normalize. So using this optimization, we learn these context vectors, and this is the visualization of the vectors in the 2D space. So we can do this visualization using like algorithms like t-SNE or TCA, or you can use any projection which preserve the distances from the higher dimension to the lower dimensional space. And then if you observe closely here, we can notice some meaningful structures in this plot. So on the top here, we can see that all the names of peoples are clustered together. On the right hand side here, we see like all the subjects like statistics, chemistry, mathematics, biology, everything, all the subject names are grouped here. And also like Samsung and Nokia. So these are like brand names. Again, these are clustered together. And the words which are like completely unrelated are further apart from each other. So like educators and Nokia, like they do not have any correlations such, so they are further away from each other. And one more property is that this embeddings also captures nice, meaningful uh, pro properties in their dimensions. So, so let's say if we subtract men from women, so this difference turns out that this difference is almost the same as the difference between king and queen. So it means that this difference, so this certain dimension, which is the difference, captures the gender, the meaning of gender. And similarly, we can have the relation between different verb forms like walking, walked, swimming, swam, and also similar relationship between the countries and their capitals. So it is able to do such kind of analogical reasoning using this simple vector arithmetics. Okay, so till now the training approach which we discussed. So if we implement this approach and run this on our computer, it turns out that it runs painfully slow. And the reason is because due to the softmax which we are computing here. So remember, like a couple of slides back, we discussed our objective function where we use this softmax to compute the probability of our context word given our target word. Now, if we look at this denominator, it's a sum over all the words which are present in our vocabulary. So this is why it takes a lot of time, a lot of computation. And we compute the softmax many times for each target word and for each context words which are present for the target word. So this is the main bottleneck here. And so to speed up the training, there is a technique called noise contrastive estimation, which provides a way to approximate the above probability under some conditions by using logistic regression to differentiate our data term from the noise term. But our primary task is not to compute this exact probability, but rather it is to learn good, meaningful embeddings. So with this assumption, we simplify the conditions of NC and we define a new objective. So this is called negative sampling, where we replace this our above objective function or the objective function which we discussed a couple of slides back here. So we replace this objective function with this new one over here. So so the previous one was a multinomial classification task. And instead of that, we replace that with binary classification task, where basically we predict if two words are occurring in context of each other or not. And so these are like it consists of logistic regression components. So we take the dot product of between the target and the context word vectors, and we pass it through a sigmoid function. And if for a given target word, the uh, whenever we have the actual context word, we want to predict the output as 1. So this is called the positive sample because we are using the actual context word here given the target word. But then we also need to give a negative example. So for a given target, we just randomly sample some other word from our vocabulary as a negative example. And we want to predict, for a negative example, we want to predict the output as 0. So that's why we add a minus sign here. And the way we choose this um, negative word is basically randomly. So we create an unigram distribution. And so the unigram distribution is just the count of all the words, the individual count of words in our corpus, and then we normalize it to get a word distribution. So this is what the unigram distribution is. And then we downweight the more frequent words, uh, like which are less informative, like if, the, etc. And the way we downweight it is that we raise it by a factor, and the exact number that was used in the paper was 3/4, which was found empirically to be working pretty well. So next we discuss some of the advanced topics. So one issue with word2vec was that it produces a single word vector for a given word. Now, sometimes the same word can have many different meanings depending on the context in which it is used. So this case is not optimal because they are actually two different words, even though they appear the same. So as an example, take these two sentences. So one is open a bank account, another is on the river bank. Now, although the word is same, which is bank, but their meaning is completely different. So one talks about the bank of a river, and another is the bank while we do our transactions. And so ideally, we would want to learn two separate representations for this word bank here, depending on the context where it is used. And so to deal with that, there is a model called ELMO, which stands for Embeddings from Language Models. And so what ELMO does is that it instead of using a fixed embedding for a given word, it looks at the entire sentence before assigning each word its embedding. And the way it does is that it is trained using a language model tasks. And the way this language modeling task is defined is that so at every token we want to predict the word in this token using all the previous other tokens. So here in this equation, we want to predict the probability of the token at cat token given all the other previous tokens. So this is the language modeling. And also there is a backward language modeling where we want to predict the probability of cat token given all the tokens which are coming after that. So that's the basic definition of language modeling. And so ELMO trains a bidirectional LSTM on this language modeling tasks. So one LSTM is for forward language modeling, another is for backward language modeling, and this is the overall objective function. And so these parameters are the parameters of the LSTM architecture. So here, like for a given word, let's say we want to produce embeddings for the word bank. Then then forward language modeling provides uh, context on the left hand side, and the backward language modeling provides context for the right side of the target word. So hence it is able to use the context around the target word to produce its embeddings. Okay, so the next we'll discuss BERT. So BERT stands for bidirectional encoder representations from transformers. And so similar to Elmo, it also uses bidirectional context. But the difference is that while Elmo is just a shallow combination of two unidirectional models, BERT uses deep bidirectional representations, which is more powerful. So this is because here in case of Elmo, we use two LSTMs, the forward LSTM and the backward LSTM, but neither of these two account for the past and the future tokens at the same time. So as a result, the information from the entire sentence or the full context is not used simultaneously at every token position, and so the model doesn't perform very well. And so this BERT architecture is based on transformers. So it only uses the encoder part of the transformer architecture. And so in the encoder part, it takes n tokens as input, and it produces n output vectors corresponding to the n input tokens. And in between, there are different layers of self-attention, and which uses these key, query, and the value vectors to learn the dependency of each word with every other word. So you must have seen this architecture in some other modules, so we're not going into this in too much depth. And yeah, so another benefit of BERT is that it brings the full benefit of transfer learning to NLP. So what it means is that previously, like if we want to use or word2vec or Elmo in some NLP tasks like named entity recognition or sentiment analysis or question answering, then we will just be transferring the learned weight vectors. And so the embeddings from these models would just be given as an input to the different downstream task-specific architectures. While in case of BERT, we are not just simply transferring the word vectors, but rather like once we train our word representations, which is also called retraining. So after pre-training, we're also able to fine-tune the whole architecture on our downstream tasks. So in case of BERT, no specific task-dependent architecture is needed because it is able to support many different NLP tasks. And so the challenge with training bidirectional word embeddings models previously is that so if we try to give bidirectional context to like to the standard language model tasks, then it would allow each word to indirectly see itself. This is because let's say we are predicting the word open here, but because since we are giving the bidirectional context, we are also giving the word open as an input. So the model will be able to see the word open, and it will just learn to predict the next word. So the training process will become trivial and the model won't learn anything. So to avoid that, so BERT uses two new language modeling tasks. One is called masked language modeling, and the other one is called next sentence prediction. So let us look at these two new tasks. So in case of mask language modeling, uh, so we mask some percentage of the input tokens at random, and then we train our model by making the model predict those mask tokens. So here is an example. In this sentence, we mask the word store and the gallon, and we make the model predict these mask tokens given this input sentence uh, with the words masks, obviously. Now, one thing to note here is that this mask is only present during pre-training, and it won't be present while we fine-tune it for some other downstream tasks. So we don't want to make our model biased towards making predictions only for the masks token. So, so what we do is that we first select the percentage of the token that we want to make predictions on. So it's usually it's 15%. And then we do not mask all these tokens that we're making predictions for. So out of this 15%, we only mask 80% of those tokens. And then the remaining 10% are replaced with a random token in our input sentence. And in the other 10%, it is just left unchanged. And also the other task is this next sentence prediction tasks. So like many important downstream tasks such as question answering or natural language inference are based on understanding the relationship between two sentences, which is not captured by earlier language modeling tasks. So in order to train a model that understands the sentence relationships as well, this next sentence prediction task is used. And what we do here is that we make the model predict whether sentence A follows, sorry, whether sentence B follows the sentence A. And in our training data set, what we do is that 50% of the time the sentence B is chosen, which actually follows the sentence A in our corpus, and the other 50 times the sentence B is chosen randomly. So so these are the tasks that is used for training the BERT model, and this is the whole architecture. So the first one is a special token called CLS token, and these are followed by our two sentences, which is separated by another special token called a separate token. And so we make this next sentence predictions in at the first token output. So this is trained by using a binary classification task. And the words which are masked, we predict the corresponding marks token at the output by using by feeding the output vectors to a softmax function over the whole vocabulary. So this is how the BERT model is trained. Okay, so this ends the section on word representations. So next we are going to look into graphs. And yeah, so graphs is a like somewhat of a different data structure, which is very generic, and its application can be seen in many different domains. And so graphs, it is basically useful to capture different interactions between different objects. And given that all the things are constantly interacting with each other, it makes the graph like a very useful and ubiquitous data structure. And so even like if we take text or sentences, we can consider them as a case of one single dimensional graph. And even image, we can consider that as a rectangular 2D graph. So there are like many different graphs coming from many different domains. So we have knowledge graphs, which says basically how different things are related to each other and their properties. So here it says about Eiffel Tower. Uh, it says that it's located in Paris, and a person named Alice, whether she has visited the Eiffel Tower or not. So yeah, the edge represents captures the relationships between the nodes of the graph. And then we also have social graphs, which depicts whether two persons are connected or friends with each other, like in Facebook or LinkedIn. And then we have product graphs, which captures different attribute properties of the products, like in Amazon catalog. We can, using graph, we can capture whether a particular product is an accessory of another product or a substitute of another product. And so it has got quite a lot of applications, right? It can use for network classification, it can use for recommendation, anomaly detection, missing link predictions. Like in Facebook, it is able to recommend like which other person you uh, might be your friend. So basically, it is doing missing link prediction. And also similarly, we can do product recommendation by using missing link predictions. So basically, there are like tons of things about graphs, and it is an independent subject in its own right. And mainly today, we'll talk about a small portion regarding unsupervised representation learning from graphs. Bit of a terminology here. So mathematically, graphs can be defined by a set of nodes V and a set of edges E. So these edges can be of different types, like directed or undirected, weighted or unweighted. And so what does this graph say? Probably this particular graph says nothing, but in real cases, the nodes encodes the characteristics of the objects in the real world, and edges capture the relationship between the nodes. And in general, there can be different types of relationships, and thus there can be different types of edges as well. So yeah, this is just a very high level definition, and like this, you can encode quite a few things like that using graphs. And so, so graphs can support many different applications like classification and clustering. And moreover, there can be different modalities involved, like we can make predictions about nodes of the graphs, or about the edges of the graphs, or some subgraphs, or even the whole graph itself. So in that respect, it provides a lot of flexibility. And like other domains, these modalities like nodes and edges, they can be labeled or unlabeled or even partially labeled. And so the one way to analysis on graphs is to learn representations for some part of the graph, for example, like these nodes or edges. And then this representation then allows us to do tasks like classification or clustering. And so today we'll consider cases where the labels are not available, and we'll see how we can use unsupervised learning techniques to learn meaningful task agnostic node representations. Okay, so what we want to do is something similar to what we did for text. So we want to associate a vector to each one of these nodes of the graph. And so deep work is one of the initial approach for neural node embeddings. And it is an unsupervised method which learns node features that capture the graph structure. So the nodes which are having similar kind of neighborhoods, they get similar kind of embeddings. And so like as an example here, for this node, the embedding for this node will capture the structure of the graph around this node. And so again, just starting with the notation, we have a graph G with a set of vertices V and a set of edges which connects those vertices. And the graph may not have necessarily have edges between each pair of vertices. Some of the pair have edges between them and some do not. And we also do not make too many assumptions about the nodes. So we only assume that we only know their IDs. So they are like a bunch of integers. So like this is node number 1, maybe this is node 2, node 3, so on and so forth. And we also assume that we do not know anything about any features of the nodes. So what we just know is that is their IDs. And so our objective is that we want to encode the network structure or the way that the nodes are connected to each other in a vector. So similar to what we did for text, we want to learn a matrix of size V times D, where V is the number of nodes that are present in our graph, and D is the dimension of the node representations. And so, yeah, this looks quite similar to what we have seen in text. And so if we can, in some way, turn this graph into a sequence, then we'll be able to borrow ideas from the NLP domain. And so this random walk is one such idea to do that. So what we do here is that we start with a node and then we randomly walk or we jump to other nodes based on the edges. So let's say we start with a node here, Vi, then from Vi we randomly go to any one of the other connected nodes. From there we go to some other nodes like that. And then it creates a sequence of nodes. So let's say Vi is node with an ID of 3. So from 3 we move to 1, then 5, back to 1 again, and then 7. And so what we get is a sequence, or rather a stochastic process of random variables. And then from this sequence, we know what to do. So this sequence can be thought of as a kind of short sentences or phrases in some spatial language. And so we can do, or we can apply language modeling to learn those node representations. And so then with this direct analogy, we can estimate the likelihood of uh, observing a vertex Vi given all the previous vertices visited so far in the random walk. So this is how we formulate this as a language modeling problem. And our task is to learn a mapping from the for each node to a vector representation. So this is a matrix which we talked about earlier. And the problem then reduces to estimating this likelihood. So we just substitute all the nodes with their node representations. So we want to predict the probability of node Vi given all the representations of all the previous nodes in the random walk. But the thing is that this problem, or optimizing this probability, is unfeasible, because as the length grows, it becomes exponentially hard to compute this probability. So instead, we can again take idea from skipgram, and what we basically do is that we reverse the task. So here we want to pick the context given the current node Vi. So here the context are all the nodes which were previously visited in the random walk, and also that are visited after these nodes. So to take an example for this sequence, maybe for the node 5, node 5 can be the Vi here, and we want to predict the nodes that have been previously visited and the nodes which will be visited in future. So this is basically the same task as we used in case of word to vec. And and also we make further one more assumption is this conditional independence assumption. So we define a window of length W around the node Vi. So Vi is our target node. We want to learn representation of that. And we will assume that once we know the representation of Vi, then other nodes which have been visited in our random walk, uh, they are uh, they are conditionally independent. So, so by solving this optimization problem, we capture the shared similarities in local graph structure between the vertices. So, vertices which have like similar neighborhoods will acquire similar representations, and it thus allows like generalization on further downstream machine learning tasks. Like if we use the learned representations in some other downstream machine learning tasks. Uh, Now, one more problem is that, so we have seen that earlier, is that if the number of nodes become very large, calculating this probability becomes very computationally intensive. So in case of text, we've seen that negative sampling was used to tackle this problem. But here in this case, instead we learn a hierarchical tree structure. So this tree structure can be learned by using techniques such as Huffman coding. So here all the leaves represent the nodes of the graph, and so the way we make predictions or calculate the probability of visiting a node is that we take the product of probabilities of going left and right. So if we want to predict the probability of node V3 here in this term, then it's a bunch of binary classification probabilities where um, the probability of V3 is going left, then right, and again left from the root node here. Okay, so let us now look at the complete algorithm. So the input to to the algorithm is our graph structure. So it takes our graph, all the vertices and edges. We define a window size W and the encoding embedding dimension T. And so this parameter is similar to the number of epochs. Um, and we also define our walk length T. And so first we initialize our embedding matrix here. And then we build a binary tree using the set of vertices in our graph. And then for this gamma number of epochs, we first shuffle all the vertices. And then for each vertices in this shuffled list, we generate a random walk, basically a list of nodes. And then we apply skipgram to optimize or to learn these embeddings. So just to reiterate, in the skipgram, we maximize the probability of the nodes that we visited in our random walk given the center node in our random walk. So that's how the deep work algorithm is trained. And then next we describe this node to wake architecture. So in deep learning, the way it does random walk is as it goes from one node to another, it does so randomly. Like if it is at any particular node and it has got 3 edges, then it can jump to any one of these other nodes with equal probability of 1/3. So in a sense, it does uniform random walk. Now, maybe sometimes in some cases, we might need to do some bias random walk. Maybe we need to explore very local structure. So we do not want to go very far away from our source node. So basically, we want to do the breadth first search here. or maybe in some other cases we want to capture the global structure. So we want to explore some little bit further away from our source node. Um, so so if we do BFS, we stay closer to our source node, and DFS we jump uh, further away from our source node, and we can also choose to do something in between. And this node to vec algorithm tries to improve the deep work algorithm in these respects. So let us see how it does that. So our objective function is the same. So we have a graph G, and we want to come up with some sort of a matrix of representations. And then we have a neighborhood defined around a source node U here, which has been sampled with some neighborhood sampling strategy. And there can be different ways to define this neighborhood. So we can do either depth first search or a breadth first search, and we'll see how to define this in a minute. But let us first take a look at the optimization function here. So we have already seen the skip-gram model. So what it tries to do is that it maximizes the log probability of observing a sequence of network neighborhood for a given source node U, conditioned on the feature representation of U. So the feature representation of U here is represented by f of U. And so this could be the youth row of our feature matrix. And so this is our objective function, the skip-gram objective function. Now, again, like similar to what we've seen previously, this is difficult to optimize. Sorry, this is difficult to optimize. So we make some simplifying assumptions. The first one is this conditional independence. So again, we assume that once we know the representation of the source node, all the other elements of the sampled neighborhood are independent from each other. And then we also make this symmetry assumption where we encode both the source and the target vertices using the same function. So given these two assumptions, you can formulate our objective functions like that. So this is our regular skip-gram objective function, and it can be easily optimized using some stochastic gradient descent approach. So so this is the log of the denominator here. So this is a normalization term, sorry, and we take the dot product uh, of that representation of the source node and the nodes which are appearing in the context of the source node. Okay, so this is how this node to vec algorithm is trained. But now let us take a look at our random walk or the sampling strategy. So first of all, some terminologies here. So CI is the ith node in our work, and C naught is the source node. And let P be the probability of going to X from node V. And so if there is no connection between node V and X, then the probability is 0. Otherwise, we define some probability. And the way we define this probability defines our sampling strategy here. So let's see how it works. So in this figure, let's say we have just transitioned from node T to node V in the current walk. And from node V, now we are evaluating which node to transition to next. So there are many different options. We can come back to T again, or you can go to X1 or X2 or X3. And so we make this transition according to the probability which is described here. And so this probability pi of Vx is same as this alpha PQ here. So this describes the probability. And here dtx is the shortest path between the node T and X. So the shortest path between node T and itself is 0. From T to X1 is 1. There is one edge. From T to X2 is 2. And similarly from T to X3 is 3. So it says that if the path length is 0, we jump to that node with probability of 1 over P. So the P and Q are the two parameters or the hyperparameters that we need to define. And so the P is thus it is known as return parameter. And then if the distance is 1, we come back to we make that choice with a probability of 1. So this is not the norm, this is unnormalized probability. And then if the path length distance is 2, for example from T to X2 or X3, we do this with a probability of 1 over Q. So this is how we approximately interpolate between our breadth first search and the depth first search. And to get this intuition, like if we pick the value of P greater than the value of Q, then the value of 1 over P will be lesser than 1 over Q, and then we'll take the probability of jumping to distant nodes will be higher. So this will encourage to take the random walk uh, a global view. And the opposite case is where we take the value of P less than Q, then in our random walk, it will try to return back to the same node. So it will try to stay closer to the source node. And so it will encourage the random walk to have a local view. Okay, so let us just quickly visualize one example of applying this node-to-vec algorithm. So this data set is called as less measurables data set. So what we do here is that we apply node-to-vec to compute the embedding of each node, and then we apply k-means to get some clusters. And here the color denotes the different clusters that we have got. So if we see here, if we take the value of P less than the value of Q, it tries to find the local structure here in this graph. So nodes which are closer to each other are assigned to the same cluster. But then if we take the value of P greater than the value of Q, it tries to find a global structure. So here we can see that the cluster is assigned based on functionalities. So all the yellow clusters are the leaf nodes, and maybe all the blue clusters are like the transition nodes, and the red cluster are the nodes which have lots of connections. And so this is how node-to-vec algorithm is useful for learning node representations, and using that we can do so many different things like clustering, classification, and stuff. Okay, so in this final section, we'll be discussing how to learn image features using self-supervised contrastive learning. So a little bit of a background. So traditionally, when we want to train a model for a new task, we usually start with a pre-trained model. So usually it's trained on ImageNet, and then we train it on our own data set for the new task. And this is required because usually the data set that we have for the new task is not large enough to be able to train a new model from scratch. So we fine tune it over the ImageNet trained features, or in other words, we do transfer learning, and through this it is able to better generalize for our new task. But this process is infeasible because annotating so much data is expensive for training our base model. But in other case, we have a lot of unlabeled data. So if we can get unsupervised techniques to learn similar features, then that would be much more feasible. And fortunately, visual unsupervised representation learning has shown great promise. More specifically, visual representations learned using contrastive-based methods are now reaching a performance on par with that of supervised models. And so SimCLR is a nice framework for feature extraction from unlabeled images using contrastive and self-supervised learning. And so to get the motivation, we can quickly look at this figure here. So it compares the performance of SimCLR with supervised models with respect to top one accuracy on the ImageNet dataset. And so if we see here, this red star are the performance of SimCLR, and we can see that it almost reaches the performance of supervised models. So this one is a ResNet 50 trained fully on the ImageNet dataset in a supervised manner. And this SimCLR is using unsupervised features with a single linear layer on top. And so this result is quite remarkable because with this we can generate our pre-trained features in an unsupervised way. Okay, so let us now quickly look at the contrastive learning. So contrastive learning learns by contrasting between similar and dissimilar objects. And so the way it does is that it learns an embedding space in which similar samples are projected closer together while dissimilar pairs are pushed further apart. Now, this is not specific to unsupervised learning. Contrastive learning is also used for supervised learning as well. And so to understand how it works, let us look at two basic and frequently used loss functions for contrastive learning. And so the loss function takes three inputs, anchor, positive, and negative. So anchor and positive are like samples of same kind. So for supervised learning, they can be from the same classes. And for unsupervised learning, we sample them in some other creative fashion. And negative sample is different from the anchor and positive. So in case of supervised, the negative comes from different class. And so in this contrastive loss, it tries to make the representation of anchor and positive closer together. So these X's are the representations of the input image, and it tries to push the negative sample at least m distance away from the anchor. So m is the margin here. So it is a hyperparameter which we can define. And in case of triplet loss, it squashes the two terms that are present in the contrastive loss. And so it is a little bit relaxed loss function. And so what it means is that it doesn't necessarily makes anchor and positive very close together. But what it tries to do is that it tries to separate the positive and negative by at least a given certain margin m. And so the m decides, so it's a hyperparameter, it decides how well separated are the dissimilar samples in our embedding space. And contrastive learning also uses the data very efficiently, because if we have n samples in our training set, we can create order of n squared positive and negative pairs from the n samples. And one more thing to note here is that it is important to mine hard negatives. So hard negatives are those samples which look very similar to the anchor or positive samples. like their representation of the hard negative is very close to the anchor and positives. And so if we sample hard negatives, our model will be able to learn better features. Okay, so let us see how SimCLR is trained. So given n images in a mini batch, it first applies 2 augmentations to get 2n samples. And remember, these samples are unlabeled. And so these are the augmentations that are applied. So there is crop resize, some color distortions, rotations, some noise, and cutout is also applied. And so these are the augmentations that are applied, and the 2 augmented versions of the same image form a positive pair. And for each positive pair, we have 2n-1 negative pairs. So these are coming from the other uh, other images, n-1 images after applying their augmentations. And so coming to the architecture, it has got 2 components here. The F component is the standard architecture like ResNet. And on top of that, we apply a G component. So it is a simple nonlinear transformation. So F performs the representation learning steps, and G network is used to get the representation to maximize the agreement. So basically, we apply our loss function at the output of the G network. And after training, we discard the G network and take the representation from the F network. So this is done to prevent the loss of information induced by the contrastive loss. So in particular, the model is trained to be invariant to data transformation. Thus, G can remove some information that may be useful for some other downstream tasks, such as color or orientation of objects. So we use this nonlinear transformation G so that more information can be formed and maintained in H. And so this is how it is trained. So given a positive pair, which is basically 2 random augmentations of the same image, we maximize the agreement between these 2 augmented pairs. And this is the loss function that is used. So it's a similar loss function you have seen in the case of negative sampling in word to vec. And in the numerator, we maximize the similarity between positive samples. And in the denominator, we minimize the similarity between all other negative pairs in the mini batch. And this loss function is computed for all positive pairs in a mini batch. And this similarity here is the cosine similarity. So this loss function compares the similarity of the positive pairs to the similarity of between the positive and all the other representations in the batch by performing a softmax over the similarity values. And so the benefit of that is that it intrinsically does hard negative mining. Since softmax is known to penalize incorrect samples more severely, so if there is any negative sample which looks similar to any positive sample and thus its representations comes close to the positive representation, it will penalize it more. So that's how it also does hard negative mining. And yeah, overall, so this is how SimCLR works. So here I presented the main ideas. So there are a few other details which I have skipped, but for further understanding, I encourage you to go through some blogs or papers related to SimCLR. Okay, so this is the end of this session on unsupervised learning. And I and others will be available for Q&A. So if you have any questions regarding this module or any questions in general, feel free to reach out at the time. Thank you.